Imagine London is just burning to the ground. Like the air is completely thick with ash.
Oh, yeah, it was apocalyptic.
Right. Entire streets are just reduced to cinders, and the political establishment is in, well, total chaos. And there's a literal plague wiping out your neighbors.
Which is a level of communal terror that is, I mean, it's almost impossible for us to fully grasp today.
Exactly. Now, add this to the picture. You have just been fired from your life's calling.
Stripped of everything.
Yeah, stripped of your income, legally barred from doing the only thing you actually know how to do, and you are currently hiding in a freezing, damp forest just to avoid being thrown into a 17th century dungeon.
And your congregation is scattered.
Right, your family is in danger, and literally every visible metric of your life points to just absolute catastrophic failure. So what is the very first thing you write down in that situation? Like, what occupies your mind?
I mean, for most of us, it would be a manifesto of grievances or, a desperate plea for rescue.
Or just panic, like incoherent rambling.
Right. It would be total panic.
Yeah.
But for a man named John Flavel, an English Puritan living exactly that reality in the late 1600s, the answer was radically different.
It really was.
Sitting in the middle of all that terror, he wrote a definitive, incredibly dense, and honestly, deeply beautiful manual on how to experience absolute, unshakable joy.
Yeah.
He wrote a book called The Mystery of Providence.
Which is just a staggering historical juxtaposition,
Absolutely. The year was 1678, but the context really starts back in 1662 with the Act of Uniformity.
Right.
The English monarchy basically demanded strict adherence to the Book of Common Prayer and the established church hierarchy. And Flavel, along with roughly 2,000 other ministers, just could not in good conscience agree to those terms.
So they were out.
Yeah, on what became known as Great Ejection Day, they were thrown out. They lost their pulpits, their homes, their entire livelihoods.
He became a religious fugitive. Like, he was forced to preach in secret.
Yeah.
Sometimes on islands in the middle of the night, sometimes deep in the woods, constantly looking over his shoulder for the authorities.
And out of that exact crucible, he produces a work that isn't just about, mere survival. It is about total comfort.
Which is wild.
It is. It's a profound theological treatise on how God is intimately, meticulously involved in the absolute worst moments of our lives. Not as some distant observer, but as a loving orchestrator.
Which brings us to our mission for this deep dive. Today, we are taking these profound, sometimes scholastically dense 17th century concepts that Flavel wrestled with in the woods, and we are going to explore how they can fundamentally alter the daily life of a modern Christian.
That's the goal.
We really want to strip away the academic jargon and look at the mechanics of this. How does understanding this concept of providence actually deepen faith? How does it inspire a more fervent love for Christ?
Yes.
And on a highly practical level, how does it provide a roadmap for finding genuine peace when your own personal world feels like it is burning down?
Because if Flavel's framework held up under the weight of the bubonic plague and state-sponsored persecution,
Right.
it certainly has the architectural integrity to support the weight of our modern anxieties, our career crises and our personal griefs.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand the architectural integrity of this worldview, we have to look at the bedrock.
The foundation.
Yeah. Everything Flavel argues rests on a single verse from the Old Testament. It's Psalm 57, verse 2. I will cry unto God most high, unto God that performeth all things for me.
And the context of that psalm is fascinating.
Oh, it really is. Because David, the author, is basically in the Old Testament equivalent of Flavel's forest.
Exactly. He is hiding in the cave of Adullam. David is running for his life from King Saul.
Yeah.
And Saul has the entire military apparatus of the state at his disposal.
He's got everything.
He has the resources, the intelligence network, the sheer manpower. And David has a damp cave and a handful of outcasts. The sensory experience of that moment for David would have been the smell of wet rock, the echo of footsteps, the visceral physical dread of imminent death.
And in that darkness, David doesn't appeal to his own military strategy. He appeals to El Elyon.
Yes. That Hebrew term, El Elyon, translates to God Most High. But it carries a weight that the English translation barely captures, to be honest.
Really? How so?
It doesn't just mean God sits on a very tall cloud. It denotes absolute transcendent supremacy. It means the one whose jurisdiction supersedes literally every earthly authority.
Oh, I see.
So when David says El Elyon, he is making a calculated theological statement. Saul might be the king of Israel, but Saul is just a localized, temporary middle manager in a universe governed by a supreme executive.
That's a great way to put it.
Saul's armies, his spears, his rage, all of it is entirely subordinate to the Most High.
So David is looking at the immediate, terrifying threat and consciously placing it under this massive cosmic umbrella. He's contextualizing the crisis.
Exactly. But it's the second half of that voice that really forms the engine of Flavel's entire book. Unto God that performeth all things for me.
Right.
The Hebrew word there is gamar.
And gamar means to perfect or to bring to an absolute intended completion, right?
Yeah, it implies a rigorous, unbroken follow-through. It means God never, ever abandons a project halfway.
Okay.
He doesn't merely initiate a plan, set it in motion, and then, step back to see how humanity handles the middle chapters. Gamar means he actively, personally drives the design to its exact intended conclusion.
Wow.
If God starts a work in your life,
Yeah.
he guarantees the finish.
See, this completely upends how modern people, even modern Christians, I think, often use the word providence.
Oh, entirely.
Today, you hear people use it almost as a baptized version of luck. Like, oh, I found a $20 bill on the sidewalk. What a providence.
Right.
Or they use it to describe a cold, mechanical fate. Like, the universe is just a giant spreadsheet, and we're all locked into ourselves, blindly playing out a script.
And Flavel goes to war against both of those ideas. For him, providence, which is derived from the Latin providentia, meaning foresight and provision, it is not blind fate.
Yeah.
And it certainly isn't random luck.
Yeah.
It is God's active, deeply wise, and profoundly fatherly governance over every single detail of creation.
Every detail.
Every single one. What's fascinating here is the crucial distinction Flavel makes between what theologians call general providence and special providence.
Break that down for me, because general providence, that feels easy to accept.
Sure.
Gravity works, the sun comes up, the seasons change. We can all look at the macro universe and agree that if there is a creator, he is keeping the planetary gears turning.
General providence is exactly that. It's God upholding the universe, ensuring the laws of physics don't arbitrarily collapse on a Tuesday.
Right.
But special providence is where the friction really begins. Special providence is the assertion that God exerts an intimate, meticulous, highly specific care over his church and over the individual believer. Flavel viewed God not as a detached watchmaker who wound up the cosmos and walked away, but as a deeply involved father who is actively orchestrating the micro details of human existence.
Okay, wait, let's stop right there, because this is where the modern mind deeply rebels.
Oh, for sure.
If you tell a listener that God is orchestrating the micro details of their Tuesday, the traffic jam they hit, the exact wording of the email that got them fired, the specific virus they contracted, it is incredibly easy to feel a sudden, suffocating claustrophobia.
You feel like a puppet.
Exactly. If God is pulling every single string down to the millimeter, where am I in this picture? Am I just a meat robot executing code?
Yeah, it's a terrifying thought if you frame it that way.
How does the idea of this absolute microscopic control actually inspire a fiery love for Christ, rather than a deep, resentful feeling of being trapped in a divine machine? Because if someone believes they have no agency, they don't feel loved, they feel managed.
That is the ultimate tension of Reformed theology. And it's a tension Flavel addresses through the concept of concurrence.
Concurrence, okay.
But we need to explain concurrence without sounding like a 17th century textbook.
Please do.
The core idea is that God works through secondary causes without violating their nature.
Walk me through the actual mechanism of that. Like, how is that functionally possible?
Think about it this way.
Yeah.
Your choices, your human agency, your desires, the natural laws of biology and physics, they are all intensely real.
Okay.
They matter. When you choose to take a new job, you're genuinely making a choice based on your desires, your financial needs, your intellect. God doesn't override your brain and force you to sign the contract against your will.
So I am still making the choice.
You are acting entirely freely according to your nature, but, and this is the key to concurrence, your nature, your desires, the circumstances that led to the job offer, the state of the economy, the mindset of the hiring manager, all of those secondary causes are entirely subordinate to and guided by the primary cause, which is God's sovereign will. God is so magnificently sovereign that he doesn't need to violate your free will to accomplish his ends. He is capable of guiding the free, uncoerced choices of billions of humans to perfectly execute his righteous blueprint.
It sounds like the difference between a programmer writing cold code for a piece of software and, like, a master conductor leading a symphony.
Oh, that analogy gets us much closer to the reality.
Because with the programmer, the code has no choice. It just executes line by line. If it fails, it's a bug.
Right.
But with the symphony, every single musician is a conscious agent. They have spent thousands of hours practicing. They are reading the sheet music. They are choosing how much breath to push through the brass. They are feeling the emotion of the strings. Their individual skill and their individual choices in the moment genuinely matter. But the conductor stands at the front, setting the tempo, signaling the woodwinds to rise, hushing the percussion. The conductor is ensuring that all those free individual actions, which would easily descend into chaotic noise, unite to create a beautiful, cohesive masterpiece.
And Flavel takes that exact concept and applies it to the most famous metaphor in his book, the tapestry.
Ah, yes.
He argues that Providence is like a vastly complex piece of tapestry being woven over the span of a human life.
Have you ever actually looked at the underside of a hand-woven tapestry while it's on the loom?
I have. It is remarkably ugly.
It's a complete disaster. It's this chaotic bundle of messy rags, loose threads hanging everywhere, dark colors clashing violently with light ones.
Knots everywhere.
Thick knots that look like obvious mistakes. There is absolutely no discernible pattern. It just looks like a failure.
And Flavel says that is precisely the view we have of our own lives right now. We are looking at the underside of the work.
Wow.
We are living in a knots. We look at a sudden illness, a betrayal by a friend, a financial collapse, and we see a dark, ugly, jagged thread that seems completely out of place. It looks like a mistake.
Because we're locked in time. Like we can only see the thread being pulled through the fabric in this exact millisecond.
Precisely. We lack the vantage point of eternity. But Flavel argues that the master weaver sees the top of the tapestry.
Right.
And when the work is finally completed and Gamar is achieved, when the design is perfected and turned over, it reveals a breathtakingly beautiful picture.
That's incredible.
And here's the radical part. When you see the finished work, you realize that every single dark thread, every jagged knot that caused you agony was absolutely necessary for the shading, the depth, and the contrast of the final image.
Without the dark threads, the picture would be flat.
It would be incomplete.
Which means the pain wasn't random. It wasn't just a glitch in the universe. It was a deliberate, necessary stroke of the weaver's hand.
And if God is that master weaver, it fundamentally shifts how we view the mundane reality of our lives. We have to look closely at the specific, ordinary threads he is using.
Right, because Providence isn't just about surviving caves like David or hiding in forests like Flavel. It's about how God shows up on a random Thursday morning. Here's where it gets really interesting. This is where Flavel gets incredibly granular. He insists that special providence conducts all affairs, and he traces this from the cradle to the cubicle.
A whole span of life.
Yeah, he starts with our origin, our birth and upbringing. He argues that every detail of your beginning is a deliberate act of grace.
It forces a massive paradigm shift.
Yeah.
Just think about the sheer statistical improbability of your life.
Right.
What era of human history were you born into? You didn't choose to be born in the 21st century instead of the 12th century.
No.
You didn't choose your geographic location. You didn't choose your parents or your genetic predispositions or your early childhood environment.
And we tend to view all of that as just, a biological lottery, a massive roll of the dice.
But Flavel insists it is an intentional, highly specific placement. He argues that if you were born into a place, an era, or a family where you had the opportunity to hear the gospel, that alone is a staggering calculated providence.
Wow, because you could have been placed in an era or a region completely devoid of that truth.
Exactly. Your very existence, exactly where and when you are, is the first major thread of the tapestry.
But then he moves to conversion, and this is where the historical accounts he uses just blow my mind.
They are amazing.
Flavel spends a lot of time exploring how God uses highly unexpected, almost bizarre means to reach people. It's not always a structured church service. Sometimes it's deeply subversive.
And the examples he uses perfectly illustrate that concept of concurrence we talked about. God using the free, even hostile actions of humans to achieve salvation.
The story of Rogerius is the perfect example of this. You have a man in the 16th century who is a papal nuncio, highly educated, deeply entrenched in the religious establishment.
Right.
And he sets out to write a definitive book against the Protestant reformers. He is actively hostile to their message. He wants to destroy them intellectually.
He hates them.
So what does he do? He buys their books, he sits down in his study, and he begins to read them for the sole explicit purpose of tearing their arguments to shreds.
His intent is pure destruction. He's operating freely on his own desire to confute them.
Right. And in the process of reading the truth in order to attack it, the truth completely dismantles him.
It's amazing.
He ends up being entirely convinced by the very arguments he was trying to destroy, and he becomes a reformer himself. Like, God used Virgilius's own intellectual pride and hostility as the exact vehicle to bring him to faith.
It's divine judo, using the opponent's momentum against them.
Yeah.
Flavel also points to Spanish soldiers in a completely violent secular theater of war who accidentally looted a Bible, read it, and were converted.
Unbelievable.
Or the account of a 76-year-old man who had lived his entire life deeply entrenched in his own self-righteousness. He happened to be sick in bed, and he overheard a conversation in the next room where a minister was purposely speaking loudly about the absolute spiritual danger of relying on your own goodness.
Wow.
God orchestrates the exact misplaced book in war zone, the exact intellectual arrogance of a scholar, the exact overheard conversation through a bedroom wall at the exact millisecond in history required to break a heart.
It's breathtaking when you view it that way. But I want to pivot, because it's relatively easy to see the majesty of Providence in a dramatic conversion story. Like, it has a cinematic quality.
Yeah.
But Flavel spends a massive amount of his energy talking about something far less cinematic: our employment, our daily jobs.
Our lawful callings.
Exactly. So let's imagine the listener right now. Maybe they are commuting to a job they find totally unfulfilling. It's exhausting, it's repetitive, it's surrounded by office politics, and it feels entirely detached from anything, spiritual.
Very common feeling.
How in the world does Flavel look at a grueling, mundane Tuesday at the office and call it an expression of God's special providence and love?
A vital question, because modern Christians have inherited a very destructive dichotomy. We fiercely separate the spiritual from the secular.
We really do.
We think that reading our Bible in the morning is spiritual, but auditing a spreadsheet at 2 p.m. is secular. Flavel, being steeped in Puritan theology, completely annihilates that division. He argues that having a lawful calling, any honest job, is a profound mercy from God.
See, most people view work as a curse.
And there is theological truth to the fact that the toil and the sweat of work are tied to the fall of humanity in Genesis.
Right.
But Flavel introduces a brilliant counterintuitive point. He notes that in a fallen world, inhabited by fallen human beings, not sweating actually increases sin.
Wait, explain that.
Flavel views the job as a hidden psychological and spiritual protection. He argues that having a daily routine, a responsibility that demands your time, your intellect, and your physical energy, prevents the idle, useless life.
Oh, I see.
An idle mind and an idle body, especially in a fallen state, rapidly descend into deep moral and spiritual ruin. Extreme idleness breeds anxiety, destructive habits, and a hyperfocus on oneself.
So the grueling 9 to 5 isn't just a way to pay the mortgage, it's an invisible guardrail.
Exactly. It occupies your hands and your mind so you don't destroy yourself. The boring Tuesday morning meeting is actually a sovereign restraint, keeping you tethered to reality and responsibility.
That reframes the daily grind completely. But Flavel doesn't just stop at the existence of work. He delves into the financial outcome of that work.
Yes, he does.
And this is where his theology radically collides with our modern sensibilities. He has a profoundly challenging view on prosperity.
He is a direct antidote to what we would call the prosperity gospel today.
Right.
The modern assumption is that if God loves you, he will bless you with immense wealth, ultimate health, and unchecked success. Flavel looks at the human condition and says the exact opposite. He observes that God intentionally, deliberately limits the financial prosperity of his own people.
He argues that God gives exactly what is needed for the journey, but often denies vast wealth because he intimately knows the specific corruptions of the human heart.
Yes.
Too much worldly wealth, Flavel warns, makes the heart careless and sensual.
There is a terrifyingly accurate quote he uses regarding this. He says that the human heart, much like the moon, suffers an eclipse when it is at the full.
That is an unbelievable metaphor, the moon eclipsed at the full.
It is a profound psychological diagnostic. When we are entirely full of earthly comforts, when the bank account is overflowing, the health is perfect, the reputation is sterling, our sense of dependence on God naturally wanes.
You forget him.
Our spiritual vision is literally eclipsed by the blinding light of our material success. We begin to trust the gifts rather than the giver.
So if a listener has been working hard for decades and God has kept them in a modest job with a modest income, struggling just enough to stay dependent, Flavel would say that is not God forgetting them.
No, not at all.
That is God actively, fiercely protecting their soul from the toxic effects of an idol they simply aren't strong enough to carry.
Exactly. Poverty or modesty is not a sign of God's absence. It is often a sign of his surgical care. Flavel compares God's provision to feeding the fowls of the air. But we have to understand what he means by that. He doesn't mean a pet parrot that you keep in a gilded cage in your living room, where the food bowl is magically refilled every morning, and the temperature is always 72 degrees.
Right. A pet bird has no anxiety because it is completely insulated from the wild.
Flavel is talking about wild fowls, birds that wake up in the freezing cold on a bare branch with a completely blank slate.
Wow.
They have absolutely no idea where their next meal is coming from. They have no storehouses. Yet God orchestrates the massive complex biosphere of the planet so that the wild bird finds the exact seed or insect it needs that day.
It's a call to a terrifying level of trust. God is managing the macroeconomy of global markets, but he's also intimately managing the microeconomy of your specific kitchen pantry.
And that trust is relatively easy to maintain when the pantry has at least a little food in it.
Sure.
It's easier to see God's hand when we get the job or when we find the spouse or when the medical test comes back clear. We can call that Providence. But what happens when the threads of the tapestry turn violently dark? What happens when the job is lost, when the spouse leaves, when the biopsy is malignant? This brings us to the absolute core of Flavel's work, his theology of suffering.
This is where we have to tread carefully because we are talking to people who are carrying real trauma.
Absolutely.
But this is also where Flavel's pastoral genius truly shines. Remember, he is preaching to a congregation that has literally lost everything. They have lost their churches, their social standing, and many have lost family members to the plague.
Yeah.
And he tackles the intersection of brutal suffering and God's absolute goodness head on.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, he makes a foundational assertion that every Christian needs to hear. Afflictions are not signs of divine rejection.
Let's hover there, because that is always universally our first psychological reflex.
Always.
The moment the bottom falls out of our lives, the immediate internal monologue is, what did I do wrong? God is punishing me. He has finally had enough of my failures, and he is actively rejecting me.
It is the oldest human reflex, going all the way back to Job's friends. You must have sinned, therefore you are suffering.
Exactly.
But Flavel argues that for the believer, for the one who is hidden in Christ's punitive wrath, was entirely exhausted on the cross. Therefore, the afflictions you face now are not punitive. They are corrective. They are instruments of sanctification.
They are the tools God uses for the mortification of sin, killing off the deep-seated pride, the selfishness, the idolatry that we are entirely blind to.
The central New Testament text Flavel leans on here is Romans 8:28. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose.
Right, and people quote that verse on coffee mugs, but usually to mean everything will turn out fine in the end.
Which is a tragic flattening of the text.
Huh.
Looking at the original Greek language unlocks the actual mechanics of how God uses suffering. The phrase translated as work together is a single Greek word, synergai.
Synergai, like
Yeah.
synergy.
Exactly. It is where we derive the English word synergy. It doesn't mean that bad things are actually good things in disguise. It implies a highly complex, harmonious cooperation of seemingly discordant, even destructive elements.
How does Flavel illustrate that?
He uses the analogy of medicine. Think of a complex medical compound prescribed by a specialist. If you were to extract a single ingredient from that medicine and ingest it on its own, it might be bitterly toxic.
Right.
It might even be a lethal poison. But when that specific poison is measured out by a highly skilled physician and mixed in exact proportions with other stabilizing ingredients, it ceases to be a poison and becomes the exact, precise cure required to save your life.
So God is the supreme physician.
Yeah.
And he is taking the incredibly bitter, even toxic ingredients of our lives, the grief, the failure, the betrayal, and he is mixing them with his grace in exact proportions to create the medicine that heals our souls.
Yes, but that raises the inevitable question. Why do we have to take that specific painful medicine? Why does God use a financial collapse for one person and a physical illness for another?
This is where Flavel gets uncomfortably perceptive. He argues that God is a targeted surgeon. He says that God often smites us in those very comforts which stole away too much of the love and delight of our souls.
It goes back to the concept of idolatry. John Calvin famously said the human heart is an idol factory. We are constantly taking good things, a successful career, a healthy marriage, financial security, the approval of our peers, and we elevate them to the status of ultimate things.
Right.
We begin to derive our identity, our safety, and our joy from the gift rather than the giver.
And when a good thing becomes an ultimate thing, it becomes an idol. And idols eventually destroy you.
So Flavel argues, affliction is the highly customized medicine suited to the specific spiritual disease your soul labors under. If your disease is a deep, arrogant reliance on your wealth, the medicine required to cure your soul might be a devastating financial hardship.
Wow.
If your disease is an addiction to human approval and status, the medicine might be a season of intense social rejection or public failure. God strikes the idol to free the worshiper.
That is a staggering way to view tragedy. It means you aren't the victim of a chaotic, random universe where atoms just crash into each other. You are a patient in the hands of a perfectly wise, deeply loving surgeon who refuses to let you die of a spiritual disease, even if the surgery hurts.
Exactly.
This is the exact theology that allowed the Puritans to walk through the Great Fire of London and the bubonic plague without losing their minds. Flavel took these massive, lofty debates about divine sovereignty and translated them into practical survival gear for the everyday believer.
He democratized covenant theology. He made it accessible so a blacksmith or a farmer could use it to survive the worst days of their life.
But I want to push on this framework because there is a specific type of suffering that doesn't involve a sudden, dramatic tragedy. It's a suffering that I think resonates deeply with the modern listener.
Okay.
What about the person who isn't facing a fire or a plague, but is just waiting? They're in the hallway. They have been praying for a breakthrough, maybe for a spouse, maybe for a child, maybe for healing from chronic pain, or just a door to open in their career, and there is nothing but silence for years.
The profound, grinding agony of the unanswered prayer. It is a slow burn that erodes faith much more quietly than a sudden crisis.
It really does.
Flavel is incredibly tender when addressing this, but he is equally firm. He introduces a concept that every Christian must internalize. Delays are not denials.
Delays are not denials. It sounds so simple, but it is infuriating when you are the one waiting.
It is.
It reminds me of a parent and a child. Imagine a young child standing under an apple tree. They see an apple on the branch, but it's completely green and hard as a rock. The child is crying, throwing a tantrum, begging the parent to pick the apple for them. From the child's perspective, the parent is being cruel, withholding a good thing for no reason.
Because the child only understands their immediate desire.
Exactly. But the parent has a superior vantage point. The parent knows that if they pull that green apple off the branch and let the child eat it right now, it will be incredibly bitter and it will make the child physically sick.
Right.
So the parent, out of love, says no. They make the child wait, enduring the tantrum, until the apple ripens, softens, and drops perfectly sweet of its own accord.
That is a brilliant illustration of Flavel's entire premise on timing. He writes, "There is a specified time for every work of providence, and until that time be come, all the competitive strivings of men are to no purpose." Think about how deeply countercultural that is for us today.
Oh, it was the absolute antithesis of modern hustle culture.
Completely.
We are indoctrinated with the idea that if you just grind harder, if you optimize your morning routine, if you network more aggressively, or if you just manifest it, you can force the outcome you want on your own timeline.
We view ourselves as the masters of our own destiny. But Flavel says you cannot force the hands of the clock of providence. You cannot pry the green apple from the tree without suffering the consequences. And he goes even deeper. He argues that God often refuses what we passionately request because God sees invisible dangers that we are completely blind to.
So we think we are praying for a blessing, but we are actually begging for a curse.
Precisely. How many ruined lives, failed marriages, or ethical collapses began with a perfectly answered but ultimately destructive prayer?
So many.
Someone begs for a promotion, gets it, and the stress destroys their family. Someone begs for a specific relationship, gets it, and it leads them away from their faith. Flavel teaches that closed doors are just as much a profound mercy as open ones. God is actively protecting you from a success that your character is not yet ready to handle.
So the delay isn't God putting you in the penalty box. It is a period of preparation. God is simultaneously preparing the mercy for you and preparing you for the mercy.
That is the exact mindset required to wait without giving way to despair. But to truly grasp that delays aren't denials and to actually see the hidden medicine inside the affliction, a Christian cannot just look forward. They must develop the capacity to look backward.
Look backward.
Yes. And this brings up one of the most practical, actionable mandates in Flavel's entire book, the command to become an active student of providence.
This is a major pivot in the book. Flavel isn't just offering a philosophical framework to make you feel better, he gives you homework. He insists that it is a Christian's explicit daily duty to actively observe, record, and meditate upon God's workings in their past.
He is developing a robust theology of memory. If you read through the Old Testament, you will notice that forgetfulness is not treated as a minor cognitive lapse. It is treated as a massive, catastrophic spiritual danger.
Oh, absolutely. Look at the Israelites in the Exodus.
It is the archetype of human memory failure.
Yeah.
God literally parts the Red Sea, destroys the Egyptian army, and delivers them in the most spectacular display of special providence in history. And within a matter of days, literally days, they are in the desert, they run out of water, and they immediately fall into blinding panic, anxiety, and idolatry. They accuse God of bringing them out there to kill them.
They didn't lose their theology, they lost their memory.
Exactly. Neglecting to remember past deliverances leads immediately to ingratitude, spiritual blindness in the present, and crushing anxiety about the future.
So Flavel literally wants people to keep records, like journaling.
Yes, he urges Christians to keep what he calls memorials of providence. You must purposefully write down the specific times you were in a desperate strait, when you prayed out of total helplessness, and when you saw God deliver you.
Because the human memory is incredibly leaky.
Especially when it comes to grace. We have a massive negativity bias. When a new crisis hits, a new unexpected bill, a new diagnosis, our default setting is panic, because we instantly forget the 10 times God rescued us from similar valleys in the past.
I have to pause here and throw up a major red flag, though. Because as a modern person, when I hear start interpreting the events of your life to find God, my immediate fear is confirmation bias. Human beings are notoriously, almost comically good at seeing patterns where none exist. We interpret things to fit the narrative we already want. This raises an important question. How does a listener look at their own life and interpret these random events without misinterpreting God?
That's a great question.
For example, let's say I get a job offer that pays double my salary, but it requires me to travel 80% of the time and abandon my family and my church. How do I know that isn't God's providence blessing me versus just a massive temptation?
That is a crucial, critical caution, and Flavel anticipates it perfectly. He explicitly warns against ever accepting an event as providence if it contradicts the revealed will of God in Scripture. Providence must always be interpreted through the lens of the Bible.
So the event doesn't interpret itself, the text interprets the event.
Always. You can never, under any circumstances, use a providential opportunity as an excuse to sin or to violate a biblical mandate.
Yeah.
In your example, if an opportunity arises to make exorbitant wealth, but it requires deceit or the neglect of your primary spiritual duties to your family, Flavel would say that is definitively not God's providence blessing you.
Right.
That is a trial.
Yeah.
That is a test of your obedience. Providence in events must perfectly align with the principles of Scripture, or you are misinterpreting it.
So what does this all mean? With that guardrail in place, what does this practice actually look like? Is Flavel just telling the listener to keep a fluffy gratitude journal by their bed, where they write down, "I'm thankful for coffee and sunshine"?
No, it is vastly deeper and far more militant than modern gratitude journaling, which often centers on just curating positive emotional vibes. Flavel's practice of remembrance is about building a theological arsenal for the day of battle.
It is like navigating by the stars.
Explain that.
If you are a sailor caught in a terrifying nighttime storm and you only look at the black clouds immediately in front of you or the chaotic waves crashing over the bow, you will panic. You will lose all sense of direction and you will capsize.
Right.
The only way to survive the storm is to look up and behind you, to find the fixed constellations, the permanent, unmoving stars that have guided you in the past. Flavel is telling the listener to look at the fixed constellations of God's past rescues, so that when the next crisis hits, you don't navigate by the panic of the waves, you navigate by the permanent record of the weaver's faithfulness.
That is a perfect encapsulation. It builds an unshakable empirical confidence for the future based on the documented evidence of the past. There is a magnificent axiom Flavel uses. He that will watch the providence of God shall never want a providence to watch.
If you actively look for God's hand, you will begin to see it everywhere.
It's the phenomenon of primed attention. If you buy a red car, suddenly you see red cars on every single street corner. They were always there, but your brain wasn't primed to notice them.
Yeah.
If you train your soul to look for the fingerprints of providence, you will suddenly see them vividly. In the timely, unsolicited, encouraging word from a friend exactly when you were despairing. In the unexpected check in the mail that covered the exact amount of a bill, in the delayed departure that preserved you from a terrible accident on your commute.
And looking back at those rescues provides the only sustainable fuel for present hope. Think about David in the cave of Adullam again.
Yeah.
How did he write Psalm 57 without losing his mind to panic? He didn't just blind himself to the reality of Saul's army, he looked backward. He remembered being a shepherd boy, facing a lion and a bear, and how God delivered him.
Yes.
He remembered standing in front of Goliath with nothing but a sling. He remembered that El Elyon had perfectly performed his promises in those past impossible situations, which provided the ironclad guarantee that he would do it again in the present cave.
And this practice of rigorous remembering naturally, organically changes how we experience the present moment. It initiates a profound shift in the human heart. We stop hyper-focusing on the gifts we receive, which, let's be honest, can be lost, broken, stolen, or taken away by illness, and we shift our gaze to the God who gives them, who is entirely permanent.
And this brings us to the final, culminating peak of Flavel's work, the actual lived-out results of all this theology.
Because the ultimate goal of reading a 17th century Puritan text on Providence is not to pass a theology exam. It is not to become a rigid intellectual historian of your own life.
Right.
The goal is transformation. Understanding Providence is supposed to produce profound, visible spiritual fruits in your daily character, deep humility and unwavering patience under trial, a holy contentment with what you have, and above all else, a fierce, burning love for Christ.
The text summarizes this reality with a beautiful, almost paradoxical phrase. It says the goal of the Christian life is finding God in all enjoyments and all enjoyments in God.
Let's unpack that carefully because it is the absolute secret to enduring Christian joy. Flavel explains that Providence reveals the love of Christ in a very specific, almost shocking way. He argues that every single mercy a believer receives, and he means the most basic things. Your daily bread, a glass of clean water, a quiet night's sleep, a moment of laughter with a friend was literally purchased by the blood of Christ.
Wait, really? We usually think of the cross as purchasing our salvation, like our ticket to heaven, but Flavel is saying the cross purchased my Tuesday morning cup of coffee.
Yes. In classical Reformed theology, humanity forfeited all right to any of God's blessings at the fall. By rebelling against the Creator, the human race legally forfeited the right to breath, to food, to joy.
Wow.
Therefore, for the believer, every single good thing experienced on this earth is a blood-bought mercy. Flavel says these daily providences, it is sweet in the possession but costly in the acquisition.
That is a staggering thought.
When you look at your dinner table, or you watch your children sleeping, or you look at a beautiful sunset, and you realize that Christ suffered the agonies of the cross so that you, an unworthy sinner, could experience that specific ordinary joy, it completely transforms mundane gratitude into profound, weeping worship.
And understanding that reality creates what Flavel calls a continual Sabbath within the soul. A continual Sabbath within. What a phrase.
It's beautiful.
It describes a profound psychological and spiritual tranquility. You are completely freed from the exhausting, crushing burden of trying to control the future because you know the one who does control it, and you know exactly what it cost him to secure your ultimate good.
It attacks anxiety at its absolute root.
But I want to linger on that specific phrase, finding God in all enjoyments. Because in our modern church culture, we often talk about finding joy in our blessings. I love my house, I love my family, I love my health. But Flavel flips the proposition. He says true pleasure is finding God in those enjoyments.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on the mechanics of that? If a listener applies this tomorrow morning, how does it functionally change their commute or their difficult meeting or their dinner table?
It is the difference between a fragile joy and an invincible joy. If you merely find your joy in your family or your job, you are incredibly vulnerable. Jobs are lost to corporate downsizing, family members get sick and pass away, houses burn down.
Right.
If your foundational joy is anchored in the gift itself, a frown of providence, a dark thread in the tapestry will absolutely devastate you. You will collapse.
Because your foundation was removed.
Exactly. But if you find God in the enjoyment, if you see your family not as your ultimate savior, but as a temporary lens through which you experience the Father's love, if you see your job not as your identity, but as a theater where God is shaping your character, then the gift simply points you to the giver.
Oh, I see.
And here is the miracle of Flavel's theology. If the gift is taken away, The giver remains entirely intact. Your ultimate source of joy has not moved an inch.
That changes everything. It changes a difficult meeting at work from a terrifying threat to your identity into a tailored tool for your sanctification. It changes the dinner table from a routine intake of calories into a daily altar of thanksgiving.
It is incredibly liberating. And to bring this entire cosmic perspective down to a deeply personal level, Flavel uses a powerful image of the believer reaching the final chapter of their life.
Deathbed perspective.
Yes, Flavel argues that when a believer reaches their deathbed and looks back over the entire span of their decades on earth, they will finally see the tapestry completed. They will see that every single step they took, every agonizing delay, every violently closed door, every terrifying medical diagnosis, and every joyful surprise was perfectly, meticulously ordered by God to bring them safely home.
They'll see the whole picture.
They will realize with absolute clarity that they never, not for one single second, walked through random darkness.
To illustrate this massive cosmic machinery of history, Flavel reaches into the Old Testament and uses one of the most bizarre, trippy, and terrifying visions in the entire Bible: Ezekiel's vision of the wheels.
Ezekiel chapter 1. It is a masterpiece of apocalyptic literature. Ezekiel looks up and sees these massive, complex, intersecting wheels spinning in the sky. They are wheels within wheels, high and dreadful. In the Hebrew, the word is ophenim. And importantly, Ezekiel notes that these massive, grinding wheels are entirely covered with eyes.
If you try to picture that, it sounds terrifying. It sounds like a piece of alien machinery. Just giant, inexorable, grinding gears that could crush a human life in an instant without even noticing.
And that is exactly how the world looks to us when we are in the middle of a crisis. When we watch the news, it looks like blind, terrifying, grinding machinery, nations rising and falling, economies crashing, viruses spreading, corporate layoffs destroying families. We feel like we're going to be crushed under the wheels of history.
But Flavel says, look closer at the text, look at the eyes.
Yes, the wheels are full of eyes. What does an eye represent? It represents intelligence, awareness, sight, and intent.
Right.
Flavel says this proves that the machinery of history is not blind. It is not cold fate. It is guided by the all-seeing, perfectly intelligent, omniscient Spirit of God. Every rotation of the massive wheel of Providence, no matter how terrifying it looks from the ground, is looking directly at you with perfect love and perfect wisdom.
That is absolutely stunning. Acknowledging that God is sovereign over those terrifying wheels is ultimately what frees the Christian to love Christ fully. You don't have to carry the impossibly heavy burden of worldly anxiety. You don't have to be the CEO of your own universe. You can resign your will to His, knowing that the eyes on the wheels are looking out for your eternal good.
The ultimate application of Flavel's mystery of providence is rest. Joyful, obedient, deeply trusting rest. God performs all things for His people, and He never ever fails in what He begins.
So as we pull all of this together, John Flavel, writing from the freezing dampness of a 17th century forest, hunted and persecuted, shows us that God is the master weaver. He is El Elyon, the Most High, who perfectly performs His plans for us. From the exact era we were born into, to the mundane cubicle we sit in, to the bizarre twists of our own conversions, it is all intimately orchestrated.
We learned that our afflictions are not signs of God's hatred, but highly targeted medicines administered by a loving surgeon. We learned that the agony of waiting is not a denial, but a necessary preparation for a mercy we aren't yet ready to carry.
And we learned that by becoming militant students of our own memories, by navigating by the stars of our past deliverances, we can endure any storm, knowing that every thread, whether it is violently dark or brilliantly light, is woven with an intentional, blood-bought love.
It is a theology that doesn't just inform the intellect, it fundamentally stabilizes the human soul in a violently unstable world.
And as we close this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. We talked at length about the master weaver and the tapestry. I want you to think about the biggest disruption, the most confusing delay, or the deepest, most agonizing disappointment in your life right now. The exact thing you are desperately trying to fix or escape or force a conclusion to. What if you stopped fighting it for just a moment? What if you considered that this exact painful, jagged thread might be the very one the master weaver is using to create the most beautiful, Christ-reflecting part of your entire tapestry? What would happen if you simply let Him finish His work?
A profound question to end on.
Thank you for joining us on this journey into the mystery of providence. Keep diving deep, keep navigating by the stars, and keep looking for the hidden grace of the master weaver in your everyday life.